Guys, I am back to playing around with what has quickly become one of my favorite ships in the game, the Lexington Dreadnought. It being a miracle worker ship means it is pretty much perfect for an energy weapon build, so I have done something that I'm pretty sure a lot of you saw coming. Yep, I put a turret build on it. So let's go take a look at what I am calling my lazy Lexington turret build. Oh, I am glad to be back in the Lexington Dreadnought. Have I said I really like this ship? Because I really like this ship. Now, as I said earlier, I made another turret build. I like to think of turret builds as sort of a recurring meme for this channel. The first time I made one, it was entirely as a joke, but they can perform well enough that you can bring them through pretty much any content. I originally thought of them for large, difficult-to-fly ships so you wouldn't have to worry about maneuvering them so much, because everything on the ship would have a 360-degree arc. And the Lexington, being a dreadnought, definitely fits into that category. Though I really should say that the Lexington really isn't that difficult to fly for a ship of its size. Of all the existing Odyssey variants, this one actually has the best turn and inertia rating. The Lexington also being a miracle worker shape is an added bonus, because miracle workers are really great for energy weapons. Now, my turret builds are always centered around one central theme. All of the weapons and abilities have 360-degree firing arcs. That is why I call them lazy boats. You don't have to worry about aiming. But the Lexington does have one thing on it that breaks the lazy boat theme: the spinal lance, which has a 45-degree firing arc. It's not really a bad thing, it's just something I thought I would take note of. Really, it just means you're not going to have to worry about any of your other weapons or abilities when you're lining up your shots with the spinal lance. Plus, it's not like I can take it off the ship. So, first off, in the weapon slots are just a bunch of Agony Phaser turrets. I decided to go with Phaser for this one just because it felt right for a Federation ship, plus Phaser is pretty easy to build for. I was a little tempted to do Baul again, but then I would want to use Sentry Mode, and in Sentry Mode I wouldn't get that much use out of the Spinal Lance. Also, I have another idea for an updated Baul turret build, I just need to get the ship I want for it. Anyway, besides the Agony Phaser turrets, I've also got the Trilithium Phasers, both the turret and the Omni Beam. Both of these are here because they have a proc that has a chance to increase my firing cycle haste. They won't stack with each other, but having both does give me two separate chances to trigger the buff. I'm also mixing the Omni Beam in with the turrets for two additional reasons. It gives me an excuse to use Beam Overload, and I need it to trigger mixed armament synergy. Both of the Trilithium weapons are available from the episode Beyond the Nexus. Now for the usual suspects for an energy weapon build: the Proto-Matter Deflector from the Fleet Colony for its buffs to crit chance and crit severity, the Competitive Reputation Engine for the speed buff, a Plasma Integrated Warp Core from the Fleet Spire for its reduced weapons power cost and the AMP mod, and the Shield from the Discovery Reputation for its extra damage against enemy shields. In the devices are, again, the usual suspects: Energy Amplifier for the bonus damage to my energy weapons, Deuterium Surplus for the speed buff, Reactive Armor Catalyst in case I need a quick heal, Kobayashi Maru Transponder for the random buffs, and Red Matter Capacitor for the buff to my power levels. In the consoles, first is Lorca's Custom Fire Control. This is here for its buff to crit chance, weapons power setting, and shield penetration. I don't have any of its set bonuses for this build, but even without them, this is still a powerful piece of gear. This console also comes from the Discovery Reputation. Next is the DPRM from the Atlas Prototype Dreadnought. This is here for its massive buff to bonus damage, and as usual is followed by the Domino from the Bajoran Interceptor, which gives a bit more bonus damage as well as some firing cycle haste. Next are two pieces from the Flagship Technology set, the Flagship Tactical Computer, and Adaptive Energy Systems. These come from the Endeavour and Sojourner Star Cruisers respectively, also their KDF and Romulan equivalents and their legendary versions. These consoles can also only be used on variants of the flagships, which is one of the reasons why I like the Lexington so much. It's a variant of the Odyssey, so it can use the flagship set. The FTC is here because it gives buffs to firing cycle haste, turn rate, and flight speed, though mainly just that first one. Interestingly, these buffs will also be applied to the entire team when you activate this. The downside is only one can be activated at a time, and after which there will be a 1-minute lockout. This can get kind of annoying if there are multiple people on the same team using this console. You could also trade this out for Timeline Stabilizer, which can also buff your haste and is also a part of the Flagship Technology set. The downside is that this console is not available off of one of the flagships. It's actually from an old event ship, the Kretum Science Vessel, which currently is only available in the Phoenix Prize store, unless you actually completed that event, then you already own the ship. Anyway, the other console, Adaptive Energy Systems, is here because it gives a nice bonus damage buff. It starts at 30%, but if your hull dips below half, then the buff increases by 50%. Which I'm pretty sure means a potential for 60% bonus damage, because it's doubling that original 30% buff. Though frankly, you're hardly ever going to see that extra bonus damage. If your hull dips to 50%, odds are you're probably already dead. Besides, a 30% bonus damage buff is still very nice. For comparison, the DPRM's bonus damage buff is 40%, and that one actually only lasts 20 seconds. Adaptive Energy Systems lasts for 30. So if you don't have the DPRM, this actually makes a really good budget alternative, assuming you're using one of the flagships. A nice thing about using two of the flagship consoles is the set bonus, which gives me a small buff to crit chance and turn rate, and on a ship like this, a little extra turn rate can be pretty nice. The next console is Multi-Directional Artillery Barrage, which comes off of this ship, the Lexington. Now, obviously I'm not getting anything out of that passive projectile damage buff, because I don't have a torpedo, but at least that hull capacity buff will feed into Tyler's Duality. The big reason I'm using this is for its click ability. It'll fire torpedoes in every direction, and give a scaling bonus damage buff depending on how many enemies are in each of my arcs. The fact that the torpedo coverage with this console is a full 360-degree arc is most of the reason why I'm using this, because it fits the lazy boat theme. Also because this is probably the closest you're ever going to get to an omnidirectional torpedo. Next is Point Defense System off of the Tier 3 Thunderchild Heavy Escort refit. It'll do a bit of phaser damage to anything nearby. It won't do a lot of phaser damage, but it will multiply depending on the kind of ship you're targeting. Its damage will be tripled against frigate-type enemies, and will do 20 times its normal damage against small craft. This console here is mainly for the theme. I felt like it was kind of like adding one more turret onto the ship. Though frankly, I'm probably going to replace this with Timeline Stabilizer. Next up are my usual low-buy-store consoles, Tachyokinetic Converter for its buff to crit chance and crit severity, and Bioneural Infusion Circuits also for its buff to crit severity. Then in the tactical consoles, just a bunch of vulnerability locators from the Fleet Spire. These are here to buff my phaser damage and my crit chance. Though with my current total of crit chance and crit severity, I might actually swap one of these out for a vulnerability exploiter. Because if I can get my crit chance up to 50%, I'm happy. But if my crit severity is lower than 200%, I'm not quite as happy. And as you can see, I'm just under 200%. But if I drop one of my locators, my crit chance will still be above 50%. And lastly, in the hangar bay, an Elite Alliance Fighter Squadron. I like to use these because they have Focused Assault 3, so you and the whole team is going to be getting bonus damage from that. Plus they don't have a torpedo, so they won't be screwing with anyone's concentrate firepower. For my specializations, I am using Intel as my primary and Temporal Operative as my secondary. That's been true for pretty much all of my videos, so I'm going to assume you guys know why by now. For the personal traits is, again, a pretty standard setup for my energy weapon builds. I know I got a little lazy with it last time, but this time I'll actually go through each one. Adaptive Offense for the crit chance buff that turns into a crit severity buff and then back. Context is for Kings for the bonus damage buff when I'm not getting shot at. Fleet Coordinator for the bonus damage buff based on my team size. Fragment of AI Tech for the buff to my energy weapons based off my control expertise skill. Innocuous for the buff to crit severity and the reduction to my threat generation. Inspirational Leader for the chance to buff all of my starship skills. Intel Agent Attaché to reduce the cooldown of my captain's abilities. Superior Cannon Training to buff my cannon weapons, which in this case is my turrets. Terran Targeting Systems for the crit severity buff. Unconventional Systems to help reduce the cooldown of my universal consoles. And the Boimler Effect to help with my bridge officer cooldowns. For the starship traits, first is Emergency Weapon Cycle from the Arbiter Battlecruiser. This will lower my weapons power cost and increase my firing cycle haste anytime I activate emergency power to weapons. Overpowered and Overgunned is from the Legendary Defiant and does pretty much the same thing as the last trait, except it gets triggered off of my firing mode abilities. Superior Area Denial comes from the Mirror Angle. Anytime I activate Fire at Will or Scatter Volley, it will grant Fire at Will 1 and Scatter Volley 1 to my pets, and since the Alliance fighters have both a beam and a cannon, they will be benefiting from both of those abilities. Additionally, it'll also grant my own weapons a damage resistance debuff. Withering Barrage is here to extend the duration of my cannon Scatter Volley by 4 seconds, which will help me keep it active pretty much 100% of the time. This comes off of the Valiant Tactical Escort as well as like 6 other ships. With Terran Goodbye, every time I defeat a foe, I get a stacking buff to crit chance and accuracy. This will stack up to 3 times and comes from the Mirror Warship. And lastly, the Ruin of Our Enemies from the Discovery D7. Every time I kill an enemy, I get a bonus damage buff that can stack up to 100 times, but only lasts for 20 seconds. Once again, I will remind you all that I do have a video that offers other suggestions for starship traits for energy weapon builds, so if you don't have access to any of these traits, you should be able to find some decent replacements in there. In the Space Reputation traits, first is Advanced Targeting Systems for the crit severity buff, Tyler's Duality for the crit chance buff based on my hull capacity, Precision for more crit chance, Magnified Firepower for the bonus damage to my weapons, and Controlled Countermeasures to the bonus damage to my weapons against controlled targets. And now for the Bridge Officer stations. First, in the Lieutenant Commander Universal seat, I'm using as a science seat. Jam targeting sensors, scramble sensors, and photonic shockwave are all here because they are unconventional systems triggers, and therefore will help reduce the cooldowns of my universal consoles. I did consider using Gravity Well instead of photonic shockwave, but Gravity Well only has a 135-degree arc, so it does not fit the lazy boat theme. In the tactical seat, first is Beam Overload 1 to buff that Omni Beam, Attack Pattern Beta for the debuff, and Scatter Volley 2 to buff my turrets, and because I can't fit Scatter Volley 3 on a cruiser. In the Lieutenant Tactical / Intel seat, first is Viral Impulse Burst for another unconventional systems trigger, and Chemosite Lace Weaponry to add some radiation damage to my weapons fire, though I could replace this with Electromagnetic Pulse Probe for another unconventional systems trigger. I still might, we'll see how well Chemosite does in the Parse. In the Commander Engineering / Miracle Worker seat, first is Emergency Power to Weapons for the bonus damage to my energy weapons and to trigger Emergency Weapon Cycle, Emit Unstable Warp Bubble for another unconventional systems trigger, Narrow Sensor Bands which will give a bonus damage buff to my energy weapons that will increase based on my distance to my target, and Mixed Armament Synergy. While this is active, if I activate my cannons it'll buff my beam, or if I activate my beam it'll buff my cannons. And lastly, in the Science Ensign seat, Tractor Beam for one more unconventional systems trigger. In the duty officers, first is 2447. With this DOF, activating a tactical ability gives me a chance to max out my power levels for 5 seconds, and activating a miracle worker ability gives me a chance to increase my crit chance. 27-47 gives me a chance to buff my crit chance every time I activate a tactical ability, and a chance to buff my crit chance every time I activate an intel ability. Vincent Kish is a relatively new duty officer that was introduced with the latest lockbox. Using him, I have a chance for my firing modes to automatically increase to the next level. So my Scatter Volley 2 has a 25% chance to become Scatter Volley 3, and my Beam Overload 1 has the same chance to become Beam Overload 2. Next is an energy weapon officer that'll increase my crit chance, and another one that'll give me some extra shield penetration every time I activate Beam Overload. And lastly is 39-47, who is here to help with the cooldown of my Tactical and Miracle Worker Bridge Officer abilities. Now, anything else I had to say about the ship I've already covered in the Beam Overload build, so all I'll say is that I really like this ship. And apparently a lot of you do too, because the Beam Overload build I did on the ship is the #1 video on the channel right now, so hopefully you guys are into this too. Anyway, let's move on to the ISE and then the Parse. 268k. That's not bad considering Augie was in here doing 800k. In the player analysis, we can see that my Agony Phaser turrets did 80k under Scatter Volley 2, but thanks to that duty officer, I got another 57k out of Scatter Volley 3. Point Defense System did almost 17k. That's actually higher than I expected it to. That's probably thanks to its low cooldown. Its base cooldown is only 1 minute, which is then being lowered even more thanks to unconventional systems. Chemosite-laced weaponry, however, only did 2k, which is actually less than the Spinal Lance did. Yeah, I'm definitely going to replace that with EMP Probe. The additional unconventional systems trigger will be of more benefit. The Artillery Barrage did very low damage as well, though most of its benefit is from the bonus damage buff you'll be getting from it, not from its actual attack. So that I'm probably going to keep on the build. So yeah, that is the Lazy Lexington. I hope you got a kick out of seeing this build. Turret builds are something that always amuse me, so I was happy to put it on this ship. Now, if you're wanting to see more of the Lexington, don't worry, I've got one more theme build in mind for it. This one uses all of the Odyssey consoles, so all the Tier 5 consoles, all the Tier 6 consoles, even the new one off the Lexington. I'm still playing around with the traits on that one, and I still need to record an ISE for it, but hopefully I should have that out soon. Anyway, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. You know the drill by now, it's YouTube, but it does help the channel and I really do appreciate it. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.